Hi, Juno News. Alexander Brown here, director of the National Citizens Coalition, writer, communicator, campaigner. Great to be back with you here. We got a great episode with Michelle Rempel Garner talking immigration. Obviously, much to unpack there, much to be concerned about still. JunoNews.com/not sorry for 20% off. I want you to take advantage of that deal as well. So, slightly turning down the immigration taps, it won't fix the flood or the flood damage. And are the liberals even fixing it at all? Carney is misleading us on permanent resident targets. This is in accordance with according to the Financial Post. The budget said the number would be 380,000 per year on a revised PR target, but it's actually closer to 528,000 after a plan to grandfather in 33,000 temporary foreign workers and 115,000 categorized as protected persons, which no one knows what that means yet. And we get into that with the shadow immigration minister. Is adding them to that headline number would essentially raise targets by at least 148,000 across 3 years. Adding insult to that injury, and in a deeply troubling Blacklock's report released Wednesday morning, Liberal MP Amandeep Sodhi has sponsored a Commons petition to grant federal aid and permanent residency to foreign students and migrant workers facing deportation or departure. More than 3 million foreigners are in Canada on valid or expired temporary permits by last official estimate. That real number, given the extent of fraud and invalidity, is believed to be much higher. And even our once vaunted immigration system is still a mess, of course, on the justice front. We have literal killers being allowed to stay in Canada for years after their crimes and continue to receive leniency from these liberal judges, as in this recent shocking case of a Pakistani immigrant who killed one and injured five in an act of road rage before fleeing the scene and not turning himself in for weeks. Knowing this man who is no model permanent resident needs to go, you're the one who's in the right here, not our failing status quo or its supporters. And on that status quo, Dan Mazier on X, fascinating sort of damning evidence he found in a tweet, which is in a time when 6.5 million Canadians don't have access to a family doctor. I don't have one. My guest today doesn't have one. Millions are suffering under a self-inflicted housing crisis, a jobs crisis. What's the liberal response? They're attempting to hide the real numbers in the margins, to commit a kind of creative accounting fraud, uh, just pulling mentions of the word free from ads about newcomer healthcare, afraid to see that Canadians would see how much they're giving away. They're spending billions on this program for immigrants. That they're attempting to hide the fact that they're keeping the mass immigration taps flowing to the detriment of our workforce and our buckling public services. That has to change. We're thrilled to have Michelle back on today. She's doing important work as the immigration critic. We all need to ensure that these changes are robust, and we can see dishonorable lobby groups, misguided business lobbies. They want to continue the excess of the last few years that have so thoroughly, broken the country. And so join Michelle Rempel Garner and I for this chat. And first, a word from our sponsor.
I want to give a quick word from our sponsor, Albertans Against No Fault Insurance. So did you know that the Alberta government is overhauling its auto insurance system under a new model called Care First, coming into effect in 2027? Most Albertans injured in car accidents will no longer be able to sue the at-fault driver. Instead, decisions about your care and compensation will be made by the insurance company, not your doctor, not the courts. Critics say this system puts insurance companies first and removes key rights from victims and their families.
Michelle Rempel Garner joins the show. Michelle, longtime MP, Calgary Nose Hill, shadow immigration critic, doing such great work on that file. Michelle, thanks for coming back on.
Thanks for having me again.
Yeah, it means a lot because you are a busy gal. You have a busy file. Like these new immigration targets that accompanied the budget. Seemingly, this is good news or better news. But then you look at this 380,000 for PR. You see the continuation of sort of a few 100,000 on the temporary stream side. That still adds up to north of 2 million over 3 years. Do they go far enough?
So I think it's important to start with kind of where you were going, which is they cooked the books.
Yeah.
They did. Like they absolutely cooked the books on numbers. So Let's start with temporary residents because you brought that up. So temporary residents are people who would be in the country either as temporary foreign workers or have a work permit through a temporary student visa, for example. Those numbers are incredibly high, especially when you look at the percentage of Canada's population. So back in 2015, so a decade ago, the number of temporary residents, particularly those that were on work permits in the country, was lower than 2%. Today, it's over 7%. And the numbers that they have it at, it's going to keep it at least over 5%
Yeah.
for some time to come. Now, the other thing to note, Alex, is that there are already 3 million temporary residents in the country right now. That doesn't count the 500,000 undocumented people that we know are in the country at least. Asylum seekers, there's 300,000 asylum seekers that are in the queue and a backlog. Many of those will be found to not have valid asylum claims. But the point I'm trying to make is the total number of temporary residents in the country is incredibly high. What didn't accompany those numbers was a plan to remove people that are already in the country when their visa is set to expire. So what's happening is you already have an incredibly high amount of the population that are temporary residents. You have a youth jobs crisis, and then what are they doing? They're adding more temporary residents. So that's on the temporary resident side. But then you're right, there's also this PR, this permanent resident sort of cooking of books, where they have these quote one-time measures to add permanent residency for different classes of people that aren't included in their actual overall numbers. So I think what they've been trying to do is sort of speak on both sides of their mouths, right? Because they know that Canadians are concerned about the high levels of mass immigration that they've enabled, the Liberals have enabled, but they also don't want to lower the overall numbers. And so I think that's where you saw this cooking of the books. And it's, but a lot of people saw through it. I didn't even have to comment on it much. There was a lot of commentary on it, like, well, wait, what is this? So it wasn't great news.
Yeah, guys like me were on that one quick, that's for sure.
Yes, you
Now,
were.
so talking creative accounting, let's maybe as charitably as I can put it with some of these numbers. One phrase I keep seeing is protected persons. Who are these protected persons? Who decides what a protected person is, and why are we going to be designating like 116,000 of them, or I believe it's close to that number, who are temporary? What the heck is it?
So we're going to have to get some more details on that at committee. I'm hoping to have the immigration minister come to the committee for levels, like this report that we're talking about today, in the next couple of weeks. But I think what they're trying to do there, I'm not sure. They've made promises to a lot of different groups of people that are in the country on sort of what would be the equivalent of visitor visas. I'm oversimplifying the concept, but for example, people from different conflict areas around the world, maybe. And I think they, rather than trying to send anybody back, they're probably some of those that PR number is probably coming out of those pools. It could be that but I think more likely they're looking at the 300,000 person backlog. They're probably going to have to rubber stamp a bunch of those applications and find spots for those people somehow too. So, but we need more detail and we need more clarity. There's been a lot of commentary on the fact that the government didn't provide clarity on what those spots were for.
Yeah.
And I've also heard a lot of people, who have been waiting in the queue to come to the country, through regular means, like sort of through the legal channels, waiting for years, going, wait a second, what is this? But the fact that we didn't have that clarity in the levels, again, it tells me that they're trying to solve problems of their own creation,
Yeah.
and it's not necessarily matching those immigration levels with any sort of metrics on healthcare, jobs, or housing. And that's really concerning. And that's where we've got to hold the government to account on that, is because the numbers are too high, right?
And speaking of too high and needing to hold them to account and problems of their own making, we have it. We're taping this on Wednesday. We have a liberal petition concern.
Oh,
We
yes.
Many have have considered this would be coming. Many, let's say, were saw through this a while ago, because you're right, they don't ever seem to address the need for deportation. There's never like an outflow. Um, we have a liberal MP, an Amandeep Sodhi, who was broken in Blacklock's this morning, who is petitioning to amnesty those 3 million plus temporary workers. What the heck do you make of that? What can we do about that? How concerned should people be?
So I know exactly what's happening here. So the Liberals, when they increased those temporary resident visas to those record highs over the last several years, they did so kind of with a wink and a nod to people coming to the country that they would be able to stay. There was actually a whole advertising program that they put a lot of money behind to advertise to come to Canada as temporary student visas, work permits. And I think the tagline, you'd have to check this, it was something like learn and then stay, or stay, work, stay, something like the key operative word was stay in there.
Yeah.
So on one hand, they're advertising come to Canada and stay, but on the other hand, they're saying it's like a temporary program. So now what's happening is they have to deal with the fact that there are 3 million people in the country. Many of them think that they should be able to stay. There's a high likelihood that some of them, or a lot of them, are going to abuse the asylum system in a way to try and stay.
And we know they already are.
In fact, the Liberals need to have a plan to get people to leave, because they weren't brought into Canada as permanent residents. They were brought into Canada as temporary residents. So this is why, you've seen me and my colleagues in the House of Commons going, what's your plan to get these people to leave? Right. But that's going to piss off, getting people to leave is going to piss off a lot of people that they made promises to. So I think I would want to know if this petition was actually sanctioned by the government in a way to get them to be able to speak on both sides of their mouth. So on one hand, they're trying to claim that they're getting immigration under control. Spoiler alert, they're not. And then on the other hand, they're having like their members of parliament go into their committee and be like, don't worry, we're going to make sure you can stay in Canada. But the reality is, Alex, you and I know that we don't have the housing infrastructure, the healthcare infrastructure, and we have a youth jobs crisis. We don't have the social or economic infrastructure for 3 million temporary residents to stay in the country. So the Liberals are going to have to deal with that, and we will be holding them to account on that front. But I think it's an exercise to have them be able to speak on both sides of their mouth.
Yeah, and speaking of winking with your choice of words, and the strain we're seeing on our public services, 6.5 million Canadians don't have access to a family doctor.
Yep.
And we see that even Immigration Canada is scrubbing the use of the word free in ads about newcomer healthcare. This was referenced in a tweet from Dan Mazer. We know the number being, spent there is in the billions on newcomer healthcare, as it even is on childcare, and Canadians are paying for that and seeing no such benefits. Why the continued duplicitousness, even from Immigration Canada?
So you're referring to a story where I think it was Blacklock's again. I think they did an access to information request on some messaging that the Immigration and Refugee Department, led by Liberal Minister Lena Diab, had put out, essentially advertising Canada's healthcare system as a reason for people to come to Canada. But as you rightly point out, a lot of Canadians, millions of Canadians, don't have access to a family doctor. I don't have a family doctor.
I don't have one either. Yeah.
Right. And anybody who walks into an emergency room right now knows the abject state of despair of Canada's healthcare system. So obviously the Immigration Department shouldn't be advertising Canada's healthcare system, particularly given that they have juiced the immigration levels to unsustainable highs over the last several years. So I think for people who might not be following this, my colleague Dan Mazier, who you mentioned, he is the Conservative Shadow Minister for Health. He's been leading a study on essentially the impacts of the Liberals' immigration levels over the last several years on Canada's healthcare system. He's been doing an excellent job. People should watch that. But no, the Liberals have not. They didn't even consider, Alex. They haven't even ever tried to get data on the capacity of Canada's healthcare system and our jobs. I saw I saw this press release. It was a region in one of the big healthcare region in one of the big colleges in Ontario that actually had to put out a press release saying that they were charging temporary residents for having babies at their hospital
Wow.
because they just couldn't keep up with the capacity. So it's this thing that nobody wants to talk about. Like, a lot of people take and in Canada rightly take pride in the healthcare system, but it doesn't have capacity to deal with the amount of people that depend on it right now, and that's not fair to anybody. So, yeah, it's very disappointing that the Liberals are internally messaging ways to spin this really dumb advertising plan. It shows that the Liberals don't have anybody in charge, that their ministers are incredibly weak. But the buck stops with Mark Carney. I think immigration has been an afterthought for him, and I think he's largely continuing, the decade of Liberal century initiative policies, which have juiced immigration levels to a point where healthcare in particular can't keep up.
Yeah, and speaking of our darling Century Initiative, which I've gone into so many times on Juno, by a recent leisure poll found most immigrants, recent new Canadians, want fewer than 300,000 immigrants annually. That's lower than outlined in the budget. Environics has 8 in 10
Yeah.
saying too many are still coming in. Abacus has a majority still saying the revised numbers are too high, and the Conservatives would be better equipped to lead on this file. Of course, you would be. So why the liberal creative accounting here to avoid real and necessary change? Who is really at fault here? Is it just Carney? Is it his Century Initiative pals? Is it calls from certain premiers? What's the role of the business lobby here that seemingly lost its way and become obsessed with this kind of exploitable replacement labor caste system and abandoning our young workers? Like, is there plenty of blame to go around here?
Yeah, I think you framed the part of the problem out correctly. There's an inordinate amount of lobbying that happens in Ottawa
Yeah,
from business groups that have based their entire business model off of essentially indentured, low-skilled foreign labor
yeah,
that has depressed wages. This is why the Conservatives, myself, our leader Pierre Poilievre, we called for the abolishment of the temporary foreign worker program because you talked about a caste system. When you've got 7% of the population as temporary foreign workers, and the way that the program is structured, it's such that essentially you're beholden to one employer, that is going to depress wages. It's going to depress working conditions, and it is going to close off entry-level work opportunities for Canadian youth. And we see that happening. There's, what is it, 20% youth unemployment?
yeah,
Um, so I do think that there are a lot of, I know this for a fact, lobby groups that they either spin and say, well, there's no youth job crisis. There's actually no impact on wages. Well, it's, I shouldn't swear on your show, but it's bull, right? Like
yeah,
it's bunk. So there is like, and these lobby groups want to keep that scenario because then they don't have to pay higher wages. They don't have to train Canadians. They don't have to improve working conditions. And I don't buy the argument that we don't have the talent in this country that we can train, that young Canadians don't want job opportunities. I also think that's bull. And I think that, this is why I'm proud of my party for saying, no, we would abolish the temporary foreign work program. We'd replace it with a system that's only focused on legitimately hard to fill seasonal agricultural needs,
yeah.
and then train Canadians and give those opportunities back to Canadian youth. And it's not fair to foreign workers coming to Canada either to work in those types of conditions. So, uh, yeah, I think that there's a lot of pressure on the government from lobby groups. And I mean, we could have a whole other conversation about what that program has done for productivity in Canada, which is also in the toilet, but that's for another day. But
Yeah.
no, it's that's why the numbers are so high, and they shouldn't be that high. But you see a lot of spin in the media on that from industry for sure.
You do, from industry, and for our audience who are unaware, the Century Initiative, this lobby group that is shooting for a population of 100 million over a very short time frame in Canada. They run like co-ads and co-sponsorship with the Globe and Mail. And so, be discerning in what you're reading, because there are times where you open that Globe opinion section, and if you're not getting a 2-page spread on behalf of the PRC, you're getting this, infinite,
That was wild, hey? I saw
yeah,
that.
yeah, a
Anyway.
status quo defending beyond belief. That's a paper that certainly seems to have a gerontocratic view of our country and wanting to replace our young workers. I even think of all the young people we have unemployed right now, and our supposed fix for our military woes is to enlist, public servants, or enlist the Ottawa bureaucratic class who couldn't do 10 push-ups. When you have an army of young men who are gym goers, they're like-minded, they're ready to go, and we're skipping over them again for people with, I don't know, pronouns in their email bio. And so that's they're just what how do you not just alienate people and drive them crazy?
Well, look, like, I mean, there's a whole separate conversation to be had on the state of Canada's armed forces and the
Yeah,
fact that the Liberals have underfunded them, changed the objectives of the armed forces over the years.
yeah,
But I do think that, that there are Canadians who either want to join the military or want to do these jobs. But just going back to what I just said earlier, uh, the policies of the government have to make sure that you're not creating government intervention such that you're taking away those opportunities from people that are already in the country. There are people in Canada who want to do these jobs. They want to join the military. They want to, get entry level jobs. I don't buy that they're not there. We need to do
yeah.
a better job of making sure that the government isn't in the way of those opportunities. And I do think it's fixable. It's not fixable if the government just keeps listening to one lobby group and doesn't listen to people who don't have high paid Ottawa lobbyists, like,
Oh,
a young Canadian, right? So,
yeah. I could go on lobby groups forever, and I routinely in my line of work get in trouble for going on lobby groups now because we have such an unrepresented young worker class. Seemingly, the certain premier's offices and such, it's you need sort of official representation after making a donation, and then the door is open for you, but they don't open for anybody else, and they're not opening for our missing middle, our lower class, our young Canadians. Another thing that really concerns people is these activist judges, is light sentencing for supposedly temporary visitors and PRs. I know it's a growing concern for so many. There's the case from last week of the man on the QEW. This was years ago, who killed one and harmed five in a fit of
yeah.
red mist road rage. He fled the scene and didn't turn himself in for weeks, yet he gets to stay as a PR. You've even been criticized for calling this out. I saw that over the weekend. Is this
Yeah.
not is this not supposed to be a no-brainer that if you're not a citizen and you commit a serious crime, and any or most crimes, that you should be sentenced and deported?
Yeah. I mean, so there's two issues at play here. One is a Supreme Court ruling from about 10 years ago, which allowed judges to consider somebody's immigration status in sentencing them if they were
Yeah.
convicted of a serious crime. You and I've talked about this before. And what that Supreme Court ruling did was it allowed for more leniency for non-citizens who were convicted of serious crimes. So as you said, they could stay in the country. I have a bill in front of the House of Commons to change this and prevent the judiciary from being able to consider immigration status in order to give more lenient sentences to non-citizens. That'll be up for a vote in the next few weeks or so. It'll be up for debate in a couple of weeks. And then there's a second issue, which is, in the Immigration Refugee Protection Act right now, there's a set of rules on what is considered to be a serious crime in terms of barring somebody from either getting citizenship or from staying in the country if they're convicted in Canada. Stay tuned for more on that, but I think that it is long overdue for us to have a look at whether or not those bars are significant or high enough.
Yeah.
The number of cases that we've seen in this regard, it seems like Alex, there's something like every day almost. That tells me that that particular section either needs to be reviewed or amended. So stay tuned for more on that because it really does concern me because there should be, like you and I have talked about this before. Uh, Staying in the country is a privilege for a non-citizen. It's not a right. And the Immigration Refugee Protection Act is that act which states what those conditions should be. And if they're not being enforced, then just coming to then we're essentially saying as a society, well, there's no rules or no consequences for non-citizens if you break the law when you're in the country, and that's not right. So yes, we will be on that as well too.
No, there's
Hello?
bad news on that front every day, and I look forward to that news because it's a daily temporary worker sex pest. It's a daily trucker that T-bones a family, and we're all just supposed to go, maybe he can drag this out in the courts. Like poor Jamie Sarkonic, who's like such an incredible writer and journalist,
She
just
is.
every single
She
day,
is.
every single day is having to interface with this crap. And I'm swearing on my own show now, and blowing the whistle on the depths of this abdication. So I don't believe in blackpilling people too much. I half the time I realize what I do for a living is I give conservative pep talks, so we don't just lay down in the street. What do you need from concerned Canadians on the social license front right now on immigration to stand against these petitions and these attempts to continue the breaking of this once celebrated system under Stephen Harper, Jason Kenney, and even our friend Michael Bonner? Like what the heck can we do to help you and to help drag this system back towards common sense and to prevent them from screwing this all up again?
Well, it is just a return to common sense. Like, there's a lot of people who want immigration reform who are immigrants themselves. And
Majority immigrants want this change
yeah,
more than anybody.
so I don't think that it's like the liberals have been trying to frame this issue out as, an anti-immigrant sentiment. I don't get that at all. Like, I
No, it's
don't get that
lazy.
in Canada.
Yeah.
There's a lot of people who oppose the liberal policies of mass immigration with reluctance to deport people who have no legal reason to be in the country.
Yeah.
And what has been encouraging for me to watch this debate unfold in Canada is that most Canadians, regardless of political stripe, are of that opinion and have been communicating that way, in spite of the liberals who are in political hot water over this file, trying to frame it as something that it's not. So I would just say, continue that common sense approach to the issues. That's how I'm approaching it as a shadow minister. I've got a great group of people who work with me from my team on the immigration committee, including Brad Radicop from Saskatchewan. But we're going to keep pushing for these common sense reforms. We've talked about the abolition of the TFW program. We've talked about changing the rules for automatic citizenship for the descendants of two temporary residents.
Yeah.
We've made substantive changes to liberal legislation on chain migration, for example, even though they got at that afterwards. But there's opportunities in the future here very quickly to have more changes. And the more that the public is just saying, like, this is common sense. Of course these things should be changed. The easier it is for me as a legislator to do that. So thank you to you for raising attention to this issue. But there's a lot of other folks in the country who are just like, yeah, this isn't really a partisan issue anymore. There needs to be some change. So that's encouraging on my front, for sure.
Good. Okay. Well, we've got our homework and our marching orders there because it's an
Good.
important one. We want to fix this for our new Canadians, our old Canadians. It's not working. They're trying to get away with pulling a fast one here. And so, Michelle Rempel Garner, thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.